And if you think back to what we discussed with capillaries, this is very net filtration pressure across capillaries.
I
Okay.
totally caught it.
All right, so we've got this glomerular filtration. Draw out what our glomerulus looks like. Okay, so I think someone doesn't have their mic muted, or they may be asking a question, so just make sure your mic is muted if you've got some background conversation. And I can't really see everyone at this point, but just double check on that. All right, so we've got this glomerulus, which we said was this scrambled ball of capillaries that are stuffed inside this capsule. And then we've got our two arterioles that are bringing blood and taking blood away. So this is our afferent arteriole, which is bringing blood towards the glomerulus. And then we've got an efferent arteriole, which is taking blood away from the glomerulus. Oh, this should have been an E. Okay, and so this direction of flow is that way. We've also got our glomerular capsule, which is tightly connected to our glomerulus. I'm sorry, our Bowman's capsule. And then we know this continues on to be our tubular structures. So we're looking at the forces that are acting across this structure, this membrane. And just to remind ourselves of what's going on here at this membrane, these are the three structures that form the filtration membrane: the endothelial cells, the glomerular capsular basement membrane, and the epithelial cells of the glomerular capsule. And so we've got our different forces here. And I'll try to illustrate these in a different color. We've got forces moving in this direction that want to go from the capillary to the Bowman's capsule. And then we've got a force that is opposing. And then we can also look at our oncotic forces as well. Okay, so we've got two forces that are favoring filtration and two forces that are opposing filtration. So let's start going through these and describe them here a little bit better. So we've got our hydrostatic glomerular capsular pressure. So the glomerular capsule, the glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure. Okay, and this is essentially a push force. Okay, it's pushing fluid from the capillaries across into the Bowman's space. Now I'll put here in brackets, this favors filtration. Okay, we also have our hydrostatic Bowman's capsule pressure. So this large P is supposed to represent Bowman's capsule. I'm sorry, hydrostatic, and then the BC should be subscript, but I can't do that. So if you can handwrite this, you can make the BC a subscript. So then we have the Bowman's capsule hydrostatic pressure, also a push force, but this is opposing filtration. Okay, then if we look at our oncotic pressures, we've got our Bowman's capsule oncotic pressure, which is pulling fluid to the Bowman space. And remember, we represent oncotic with this symbol pi. So the Bowman's capsule oncotic pressure, this is a pull force. And this is going to favor filtration. And then lastly, we've got our other force here, which is also an oncotic force. This is the glomerular capillary oncotic pressure, and that is also a pull force, but that is opposing filtration. Okay. And let's just also make a note here that this should always be 0. There shouldn't be any proteins here in the Bowman space that pull fluid to them. So this force should always be 0. Okay, so let's look at an example here and some calculations. So if we're looking at, let's say we had a hydrostatic glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure of 60, which we know. If we had a hydrostatic Bowman's capsule pressure of 15, and then we've got an oncotic glomerular capillary pressure, which we know to be about 29, really high. And then again, an oncotic Bowman's capsule pressure, which should always be 0. Okay, I'm gonna give you guys a minute to work out what that should be given our formula of filtration. So our glomerular filtration pressure is equal to our filtration forces minus our forces that oppose filtration.
For the BC, you wrote that it's 0, but then it's like on the GC, you wrote that it's always 0. It's like different than what the
Oh, I see. I think I flipped these around. Okay, so the glomerular capillary, yeah, that should be. Okay, I made a mistake here. So this should not be 0. This one should be 0. Okay, thanks for catching that. I'm not sure who that is, but thank you. So this should be 0. Right, we got no proteins here that are pulling fluid towards the Bowman's capsule, okay? But here we've got lots of proteins in the glomerulus that is exerting that pull force back towards the capillaries. Okay, so take a minute, try to calculate this out, and we'll reconvene here. So I'll give you about a minute.
Charisse, you in the beginning, before you went over the pressures, you said that there were 3 things that made up. I think you said the filtration pressure, and you said it was the endothelial cells and the basolateral membrane, and then there was something else.
Yep, so the endothelial cells of the glomerular capillaries, the basement membrane of the Bowman's capsule, and then the epithelial cells or the podocytes of the Bowman's capsule.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Oh, okay, I saw the question. Okay, so let's look at what this calculation should look like. So we should have our forces that favor filtration, which we know are the glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure, so that's 60. And our other force that favors filtration is our Bowman's capsule oncotic pressure, which we said is 0. And then we're going to add those two up, so that's 60, and then we subtract out our forces that oppose filtration, which are our other 2 forces, so that's 29 plus 15. Okay, let's put these in brackets so they make a little more sense here. Okay, and so that should give us 60 minus 44, which should be 16 millimeters of mercury, okay? Everyone understand how we get this 16? Or did anyone not get 16? Okay. And I'll be looking at the chat for a response because I can't see anyone. Okay. All right, looks like everyone got this. So this is how we calculate our glomerular filtration pressure. Basically the pressure that's exerted, the net pressure, so this is a net pressure that's exerted across the filtration membrane. And as we can see, it's always going to favor filtration, meaning that we're always gonna have our net movement of fluid from the glomerulus across into the capillary. Okay, and this is where having protein here becomes really detrimental. If we've got a lot of protein here, that will exert a pull force in this direction, which will kind of throw our pressures off. Okay, so we always want to make sure that there's no protein in the Bowman's capsule, and that is maintained by the structure of the filtration membrane. Okay. All right, so I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to clear. All right. Okay, so this is kind of an overview of what that should look like. So we got our 60 plus 0, and then we subtract out 15 plus 29. So that's a total glomerular filtration pressure of 16 millimeters of mercury. All right, and for the reference, make sure that you're able to calculate this, but also able to walk through this, because remember, we're assessing now in an essay type of assessment. So make sure that you're able to walk us through how you get this calculation in terms of recording a response in an essay format. Okay, so don't just be able to calculate this. Make sure that you can walk us through, you know, why you added the filtration pressures, what are the filtration pressures favoring, what movement, and so on. Be able to express that in that type of question.